Something that has been gaining momentum lately very much is microdosing. Most people microdose by just taking the entheogen of their choice and putting it in a lot of water. Which is nothing wrong with that. Again, it's just one way of microdosing, but it's kind of like a very unrefined, not very elegant way of doing it, because you're not capturing the whole plant. From an alchemical point of view, every plant is made out of three parts. It's the body, the mind, and the spirit of the plant. These three parts cannot be taken out by one process. The spirit of the plant is usually essential oils, volatile substances, oily substances, these things which evaporate. If you cook something, they evaporate. Anyone who's ever had like a piece of ayahuasca and smelled that before you cook it, it has almost like a minty, camphory smell. It's a beautiful, beautiful essences. If you smell a cooked ayahuasca, you won't smell that anymore. Not just because it smells vile, it's because that stuff's gone. It's gone. It's not in there anymore. So in order to preserve the spirit of the plant, you need to extract in a certain way that can be done with aqueous distillation or ethanolic extraction, the volatile part, which is also the head note. You could say if you're in a perfume, you've got three parts as well. That's the head note of the perfume as well. So the next one is the one that usually every tincture virtually that exists comprised of is the mind of the plant. That's the watery extract. If I cook something, if I make an alcoholic extract of something, I get the mind of the plant, nothing else. I don't get sometimes I catch a little bit of the spirit, but never the body, which is why if you make a cannabis tincture or a tincture of something, it actually is not a cannabis or marijuana tincture anymore afterwards. It's a THC tincture because it's the tincture has now recollection anymore of the plant it was once. It has the ingredients, but it's lost the body. The body is like the DNA of the plant, and that is locked into the matter of the plant that it cannot be extracted easily. The only way to do it virtually is, and it's a staged process, you extract the head note first, the spirit, then you extract the body. And what's left over after you've done a thorough extraction of the other two, you have to incinerate the plant matter into a white ash. It doesn't have to be, it has to be white ash. That white ash then contains the precise ratio of minerals that makes that plant. It's almost like the crystal. A crystal has the energetic structure. Our bones are crystals. They're made out of minerals, and because of their length, they're vibrational crystals. They're like antennas. And so the same way in the plant, through the whole plant, has these minerals locked into the fiber of the plant. If you don't transport these into the essence is just a chemical. It's not a plant essence anymore. So what you do is, once you have that white ash, you wash it out with water in order to generate an alkaline solution of the ash, basically. And you recombine all three phases back into one, which is then called the plant stone, out of the alchemical process. And the plant stone is the basis of which the alchemical spagyric essences are made. Of course, it doesn't work for LSD because there's no plant that grows. Of course, there is a plant. We have to stand corrected. There are plants that don't just do LSA, they actually do LSD. For a long time it was thought it's fully synthetic. It isn't. There are plants that produce it, but small amounts. And it's not the full, you get other salt alkaloids in there, so that's always a danger as well. A lot of the naturally occurring LS, like LSA, the baby wood rose, they have a lot of cyanides in there, which makes them very toxic to consume on their own. But you can't obviously make out of a chemical. So you couldn't make a spagyric MDMA, right? You could make a spagyric sassafras maybe, but a spagyric MDMA wouldn't work. So from plants you can make it. What are the advantages of a spagyric is the next question. Why don't you just take the plant, the full plant, or do a homeopathic, or like a watery? So while the water carries the vibration if you just dilute a plant or a substance, or it also carries the vibration if you make a homeopathic, it doesn't quite have the strength. And that might also have to do with my background. As I said, I'm a chemist. From my scientific point of view, if you have a D1 or D2 homeopathic dilution, which means less than 1 molecule per liter, I don't know. Are you buying water? Technically you are. What I found interesting though, and it's not that I don't believe in homeopathy. My ex-wife, we were vegan, raw vegan, and she had something where she had to take salmon D5 or D6. Her breath smelled of salmon. So how is that possible for somebody who doesn't eat fish or anything, and you take something which doesn't contain any salmon chemically at all, nothing, But the energy of the salmon is so strong in there that it invokes the energy of the salmon in the person. So I had to say that was what convinced me. I don't know how about you guys, but for me that was like, I don't take homeopathic medicine myself, but at least I don't question it anymore, and I don't smile at people who do, because it has to work. If it does that, it has to work. I'm a scientist, so it does work. But for me, what I like about the Spagyrics is that they're not quite as subtle. The idea also is, like I said, that's then the comparison downward to the high dilution, because obviously you can do a high dilution, you wouldn't run into any issues because you're selling water. It's legal to sell water in most countries in the world, so you can have a homeopathic whatever, and it's legal because it is technically water by law. The full plant, of course, you run into various issues, starting legal as well, but also then doing a ceremony, there's a lot of things to take into account, and it's not just babysitter, dog sitter, diet, need to take a day off, need to take all my stuff to some place, and often travel abroad. Most people do ceremonies abroad. So that comes with a whole lot of things around. And the diet, some people don't understand. The diet is not just food. There's also sexual abstinence and all of these things, which some people struggle with to understand why you have to do it and all of that. So it's not the most convenient thing to do once a week, because if you have to do 3 days prior and 3 days after, that leaves you 1 day a week where you can actually do something. So not a good thing, So that doesn't work for everyone. Some people, if you're a monk, maybe that's okay, depending on what type. But if you want to live a life as a householder, which we all are, everyone here is a householder, including myself, of course. That's our incarnation this time. Nobody's meant to be a monk here, and so doing these ceremonies has its side effects. It's good to do them, and it's good to do them in retreat style, compressed, a few together, and then have a few weeks or months integration in between. What I like is with the Spagyric essences, you can actually bridge the time in between and keep the practice, because the Spagyrics don't interact with any medication. That's another downside of taking ayahuasca, is if you're on something chemical or made out of crude oil, you're very likely not to be compatible with an ayahuasca ceremony. Why? Because where ayahuasca comes from, the people there weren't stupid enough to make oil into plastic and pills and take them. So it's literally, ayahuasca is the most non-toxic substance in the world. It is virtually impossible to drink that much that you could harm yourself with it, unless you're on pharmaceuticals. That is the big thing. So then I would personally say it's more the pharmaceutical that kills you than the ayahuasca, because the ayahuasca doesn't. The pharmaceuticals do. If you take enough of antidepressants in one go, you're dead too. Ayahuasca doesn't happen. So that's another point to take into account. Some people can't or don't want to go off their medication, and I also say they shouldn't, right? The worst thing to do is wean yourself off your medication prior to a ceremony, because then you might run into the risk of getting anxiety attacks, and then you groove in those neurotransmitter pathways even more. So that's something to avoid. So with the Spagyric essences, you don't have to do any diet, you don't have to do any preparation. If you look at it from a yoga perspective, maybe you would have your daily yoga. You go to yoga in the morning before work or after work or in the lunch break, depending how your day is planned out. So you can do your, let's say 5 times a week. Doesn't have to be daily, but 5 times a week you do your yoga to keep up the practice. But that's obviously not the same as doing a retreat over a weekend or a week where you do yoga 3 times a day and don't have to go to work in between. I see it's the same interaction between the essences and a ceremony. It's not meant to replace a ceremony. It's not even meant to be doing the same thing. It's a completely different thing. It's the daily practice. It's the daily maintenance, so to speak. Another advantage is, your greatest strength is always your greatest weakness. We have this incredible mind. We have which is probably the most complex piece of engineering in the known universe. It is capable of creating pieces of metal that fly humans through outer space. It can write novels, and it can make art, like the most incredible things it's capable of. But at the same time, it's also your greatest demise. Everyone who's sick in our society has a mental problem in the first place. There are not so much physical issues anymore that we have. That's more in tribal societies, where there's a more immediate relationship to your environment. Here, not so much. You're more worried about losing your job, losing your girlfriend, losing your car, getting a ticket, or whatever. These are the things you worry about. If you live in the rainforest, you're more worried about getting an infection, stepping into something, dying, literally. Here, okay, New York winter is harsh, but it's not easy to die even as a homeless person here. You know, I'm not saying that they don't, but it's not that easy. In a tribal society, it's easy to die. You know, it's actually you can be the head of the tribe, and you might just step into a spider or be bitten by something, and you'll die. You know, so it's completely different. So our problems are very much mental, and our mind creates most of our diseases, psychosomatic. You have to understand that our mind is so convincingly powerful in its imagination. We have no way of understanding or verifying any sensory input we have. If I touch something, my mind tells me there's a table, but my brain has no way of seeing that, because it's all electric signals that go into the brain. That's all it is. So our mind creates this, it's almost like a three-dimensional holographic view of our environment, which we believe is what we see. But in scientific tests, they found out that you only use about less than 100 dots to create the whole view of your surroundings, because most of the objects are generated out of memory. They're not actually seen. And so this is the image that we see is actually not what we see, it's generated. So this is an interesting take on what a reality is as well. But the thing is, it's so real that when there's a situation you need to escape and you're attacked, what will happen is that you come into fight or flight. You use the last 10% of your reserves to save your life, which is a good thing, you know.
Sorry.
That's okay. So that is the fight or flight. It's like a survival instinct, you know, and which is important. But if you are, who's ever seen somebody who had a nightmare? They wake up drenched in sweat, 180 beats per minute, the heartbeat, but they're safe and sound in their own home. Nothing's actually threatening them, but they're going through the same physical symptoms than somebody whose life is threatened. And so that is the problem. If you have trauma that is stored in your mind that your mind replays, you will be subjected to the same physical reaction every time, all the time. And that is something that you cannot physically survive. Our bodies aren't meant to do that. Your body's not meant to fight for its life once a week. You know, that's not what it's meant to be doing. So this is where the problem is. So the mind is very powerful and very convincing. So one of the purposes of the medicine is to work out these traumas. The other thing is also that your mind is an entity of its own. Of course, it will tell you that you are the ego and the ego is you. It's the Highlander thing. You know, there can only be one, and that's obviously your ego. Nothing else exists. And so the ego will try to tell you that it's only that you are the ego. But it is not the case. So if you do anything to challenge the sovereignty, you know, of the ego, it will defend itself. And so this is exactly what happens when you do sacred plant work. And in a lesser extent also with meditation and other techniques, because you go and look into it and let things unfold, but definitely if you do very deep expanded consciousness work. So what the ego will do, it will defend itself. It will say, I don't believe that, that's humbug, this is just, you're just hallucinating, why would you quit your job on a whim? You know, all of these things is what your ego will say, you know? Or leave your spouse on a whim, you know? So this is what your ego will say. This is what your mind will try to put against. And so there's two stages in the ceremony where the ego will interfere. It's in the actual experience. It will, and you probably all know this. You see a vision and your ego will go like, what does that even mean? A unicorn with dots, you know? And so it's like, and so that moment you're completely out of the vision, and that's the purpose of the ego. It's trying to get you out of that space so that you're back in the mind, back in this reality. The mind is the physicality. So you avoid that because microdosing gives you no conscious effect. You don't feel anything. While you microdose, your ego it's like guerrilla tactics, you know? Your ego doesn't even know that the enemy is already past the you know? And so it's all good. The ego doesn't know what's going on. And so I've seen, and so the microdosing is not just maintenance. I recommend it to people who are, for whatever reasons, valid reasons, you know, if somebody doesn't want to do a ceremony, it's okay, right? There's nothing wrong with that, you know. Of course, it's not good, but it's their journey. So, so what I recommend is giving them the microdosing, because the microdosing is so diluted. You take 3 drops out of a bottle where a whole bottle constitutes less than a portion. So you can drink the whole bottle and you wouldn't experience anything. That's how diluted they are, but they are so strong out of the dilution, out of the spagyric dilution, that you take 3 drops and they have the most amazing and profound healing effects. People that sometimes you can't tell them exactly what it is. You know, some people are a bit like then they Google ayahuasca and that's it. They won't take it. But if you say, well, it's a tonic from the Amazon rainforest, you're not lying, right? That's the truth. That's exactly what it is, you know. And they take it and they have the most profound transformation, healing happening. Sometimes it's intense for them. Sometimes people even say that they have intense dreams and intense transformation happening. But I've seen healing on a scale that is mind-boggling. A really, really astonishing healing coming from those microdosing. And my way of understanding that is, like I said, the ego cannot work against your experience because there is no experience. You take the microdosing, you go about your things. You can obviously take the microdosing as well, meditate and work with these energies if you're very open to it. But most people, they don't feel anything, but the shifts happen. And this is exactly what you want. And so I find in this energy field between doing the ceremony with a direct attack on the ego and like the guerrilla infiltration attack, you have a pretty good stance against it.